Hello, everyone. You can take your seats. My name's Matt Trentman. I'm on the board of the Rattlesnake Creek Watershed Group. Thanks so much for joining us today on this kind of glum, but, potentially very snowy soon day. So with Rattlesnake Creek Watershed Group, we put on these rattlesnake stories. We also do other outreach events, and overall, we're just trying to be a voice for the watershed. This week, we'll have Jamie Jonkel talking about bears. In March, we'll have our final presentation of this winter, and that'll be on fire and the rattlesnakes. We have a whole group of folks agency people, mostly land managers, ranging from the county to the Forest Service, and I think some other ones that I can't think of off the top of my head, who will be presenting on the history of fire, what they're doing to manage for it, and a little bit about the evacuation plan that they put together last spring. This presentation is being recorded by MCAT, so thank you for that media assistant grant that allows us to put this on our website so others can watch it in the future. Just a few other small announcements. The Bonner History Roundtable has a presentation coming up in a few weeks, February 16th, I believe. And Sally, I can't remember Sally's last name, Sally Thompson will be giving a presentation there. They're our neighbors to the east, and Sally has given talks for us also in the past. So there's a flyer up here, and you can talk to this Judy, if you need more information. Finally, the Rattlesnake Creek Watershed Group has created a bear action team. And so this is a specific subset of our group led by Beth Judy over here that's focused specifically on actions around bears. And so we have a specific Facebook page for that. There's also a separate sign-up sheet that you can sign up to receive emails, and also potentially if you're interested in volunteering, we'd be really excited to have you. Did I cover all the announcements folks asked me to get out? Great. So with that, I'll introduce James Jonkel. He's the Region 2 bear management. He's a Region 2 biologist focusing on bears and lions and on the bear management team. He's been in this position in Missoula for over 30 years, which is quite the feat, but also born and raised here, and he spent a lot of time doing a variety of wildlife-related jobs across the West. So Jamie's going to give a nice little presentation about bears.
Well, thanks for coming today, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to talk today. I should have put together a little PowerPoint presentation, but I just couldn't find the time. I'm a little discombobulated. A good friend of mine passed away about 2 weeks ago, and I'm helping his sister with his estate. So I've been every spare moment up in Ovando helping her out. So last night, pretty late, I was jotting down a few notes, so bear with me if I lose my place. So the topic is a bear's eye view of the rattlesnake. So it's going to be emphasis, in the rattlesnake, but I'll talk a little bit about the whole Five Valleys area. And I thought first I'd give you some history or some background on, what bears did before European man, showed up on the scene. And, in the 1600s and 1700s, just as, we were coming over from the old country, this was completely untouched. It was just Native Americans and wildlife. And we had lots and lots of black bears and lots of grizzlies around here. The grizzly populations weren't as dense as they were over on the prairies. But, I like to call our grizzlies over here the mountain grizzlies. They were very similar to all of our, northern hemisphere brown bears, but they were just a little bit different than our prairie grizzlies. But they, used all this country. They took advantage of all the natural sources and followed the seasons around. Both species. We even had buffalo, a western Montana bison that lived here. And a lot of my old buddies have found, bison skulls and stuff in the foothills around here. Again, the density of bison was nothing like the prairie. But, when we came over, starting in the 1650s and early 1700s, with the Hudson Bay Company and the early French explorers and Northwest fur trapping companies, they really started whacking our bears, mostly for pelts, the robes. They were indiscriminate on either species. They, like the Hudson Bay Company, didn't have them broke up into black bear fur and grizzly bear fur. It was just bear. So they took a lot of bears for their hides. And then, when the Jesuits showed up and when the early French homesteaders showed up, and then when the settlers followed behind them and then the miners followed behind them, there was just a whole lot of market hunting. People were living off of the elk, the deer, the bison, the bears for meat and the fur. So they hit them hard. They hit the grizzlies hard. They hit the black bears hard. They hit all of the wildlife hard. And it continued that way. Between 1815 and 1900, it was just a big old free-for-all. People, no seasons, no nothing. They were shooting anything that crawled or moved and eating it, pretty much. But one of the earliest records I found of a grizzly sort of documented here in the Rattlesnake was in about 1900 in the newspaper before the Missoulian. I think it was called the Pioneer or the Hellgate Trader or something like that. There was a little article we stumbled across about a big old grizzly that came down off the face of Mount Jumbo, and kind of all sorts of people saw him going down the face of Mount Jumbo, and they came right down into the Rattlesnake Valley and crossed by the Lincoln School, which was one of the few sort of buildings, modern buildings up there at that time, and then went across the valley and went up and over, Clearwater, kind of over by the Randolph homestead and disappeared. I just thought that was interesting because he put up quite a scare. Everyone didn't like the fact that he had gone past the schoolyard. But let's see, like everyone that lived here in Missoula, wanted bears for their bear fat. So there was a lot of hunting going on with all the black bear that were around here. And, the black bears were never really terribly impacted. Their populations got down pretty low, but there were always plenty of black bear. But the grizzlies really got hit hard. And there were really no, seasons, no regulation at all until about 1943 is when Montana had its first bear license. But it was for a bear of either species. And some regulation kicked in, kind of went back and forth from having a year-round season where you could even dig them out of a den if you wanted to having a spring season and a fall season. Then it went back to a all summer, fall, spring season, and then back to a spring, fall season. And we've had a spring, fall season pretty much ever since then. But, most of the bears that were in and around the valley here that started showing any inkling of food condition behavior or habituation usually ended up getting popped and canned and all the fat rendered down pretty quickly. And at that same time, right up until, through the 20s and 30s, there was some pretty big time predator control programs. The state and the feds, the livestock industries had bounties. They were using poison, so they were taking a hit pretty much all the time. Finally, for the grizzly in 1967, partly because there's so much attention on the reduction of our grizzly population, the state of Montana did enact a license and a season for grizzlies in 1967. And they were managed that way, at least in this area, up until 1975. So you weren't allowed to kill females with young, but it was a pretty wide open season, and there was a lot of old timers around the Missoula Valley that I talked to that had harvested grizzlies in and around the Missoula Valley. One of them was Bev Knapp. He was the brother of a good friend and a school teacher of mine. But just west of the Y, up in Black Cat Creek, he harvested an adult male grizzly there in, golly, 1969. And then I found some records of some grizzlies being harvested over the top of the rattlesnakes, more over on the Gold Creek side and Belmont side. A few bears harvested in there. Uh, let's see. Grizzly hunting was getting a lot of scrutiny, and finally in 1975, the state was like, okay, we better back off, and they started having more of a regulated hunting season, and they stopped hunting the grizzlies, in and around the Missoula area, but they were still hunting them over in the Scapegoat, the Bob Marshall, and then up in the Flathead Valley, right up until 1991. Um, Black bears, though, like I said, did pretty good. And when I was a kid, I a lot of my hunting buddies, a lot of my school teachers, a lot of my dad's friends, were harvesting black bears on a regular basis, just all around town. In fact, rattlesnake drainage was a big time hunting area for a lot of different people. Um, but like I said, the black bears are pretty resilient, and they held their own. Um, Even then, our bears were really keyed into the natural food cycles, and I'll go into those a little bit later. But in the 1900s, like when the Greeno Mansion was here, Greeno Park was first donated in early 1900s. They regularly had bears coming down, into the Greeno Park area, following the riparian area down along the creek. And I'm sure all of you have seen the old bear cage in the park there. Um, After the Greeno Mansion donated that property, I think that was built mostly just to, for the bears that people trapped and stuffed in there locally as a little kind of a feeding zoo. But the University of Montana started keeping captive black bears and a few captive grizzly cubs there as their mascot for the Montana Grizzlies. And I stumbled across a really cool article and then some photographs in the archives where over the years they had multiple different black bears that they kept in the cage, and then they'd have them on chains and stuff, and they'd bring them to the games. And a few of those were young grizzly bear cubs. And that they did that up until the 1930s, and if I believe it was the sheriff department that had to feed the bears every day. But I thought that was just crazy. Um, and when I was a kid in the 60s and 70s, I mean, the rattlesnake drainage was still pretty dang wild. I saw the very beginning of some of the subdivision, up in Lincolnwood, Lincoln Hills, Elk Ridge. And I remember one of the first houses up there, my father and I went to go visit the person that was building it, and we were having coffee in the kitchen, and there were mule deer and elk. It was in the winter, and they were just all down in the flats there, digging in the snow. It was a deep snow year, and it was just pretty amazing. I remember going up on Strawberry Ridge and just seeing big, giant groups of mule deer. I remember stomping around up on Jumbo, lots and lots of elk, lots and lots of deer. I remember one of my school teachers, Mr. Miller, killed a 6-point bull right at the Rattlesnake Trailhead. The trailhead wasn't really there yet, but he parked and was going to do a run up that ridge, and right where the kiosk and the signs were a great big 6-point bull that he harvested. And so the rattlesnake was sort of out in the country, and my dad used to hunt up Beast Cove and Fraser and Pilcher Creek, and he and my uncle had a little hunting camp kind of down at the bottom of Bisco Creek, and you could drive up the Rattlesnake at that time. And then you could also take motorcycles all over that country too. And I actually did a motorcycle trip one time. I went right up Spring Gulch and all the way up to the top of, oh, not Murphy Peak, but I did the big loop and came down Falls Creek and out the bottom. And then another time I went up, oh golly, Sawmill Creek and all the way up to Sheep Mountain. But you could just go anywhere you wanted to with a motorcycle. And then you could drive right up the bottom. So it got hunted hard, but again, there were still, plenty of bears. There's plenty of good natural foods there, black bears. Let's see. Um, and then in 1980, Cass Chinsky, I don't know if you've ever had Cass Chinsky come here and give a talk. He'd be a great person to give a talk about, how he lobbied to get the Rattlesnake Wilderness in place. And finally, in 1980, they did create the Rattlesnake Wilderness, and things changed a lot at that time. You could no longer baja all over the place with a motorcycle. You couldn't drive up the bottom. They created the Melcher Corridor, so admin use could still occur right on the bottoms. But, the rest of the country just became hiking trails. And that's when the Rattlesnake Recreation area kicked into gear. And since that time then is when things have evolved and changed. Just the subdivision, the amount of building that occurred up there was just like every year, new houses, new homes. And recreation over time, too, just increased, where hunting kind of went out, and instead it was mountain biking, jogging, hiking, So big change. And since for about the last 20 years, something kicked into gear. At first, all the wildlife were displaced, because of all the human activity. But it's called the urban wildlife phenomena, and it's happening across the West. It's even happening on the East Coast. It's happening everywhere. We've taken over so much of the land, that I always say we're like rats on the landscape. If you're a bear, or if you're a lion, or if you're deer or an elk, and you get pushed out, if you still want to use the good habitat, the best habitat, that we've taken over, you have to become complacent around humans. You flat have to if you want to survive. So this urban wildlife phenomena really kicked into gear here in the Missoula area about 30 years ago, and it was really obvious in the Rattlesnake. And that's when we started seeing a lot of those bears, that were coming down for the natural foods, started going like, wow, if I just ignore these two-footed creatures, I can access these lushly watered green lawns. I can eat the berries and I can feed on the old orchards like I have for forever, but I can also feed on these green lawns, that are watered and full of clover and full of dandelions. And then they started, discovering garbage. They started discovering birdseed. They started discovering freezers. They started discovering dog food on back porches. And it's just, it kind of, for the last 30 years, I've watched it just progressively get more and more kind of interesting. So let's see. The driving force for a lot of our bear activity in the Rattlesnake has nothing to do with other than the natural foods that are available here and the terrain features. So if you think about it, the Rattlesnake drainage is a huge drainage. It goes way up into the heart of the Rattlesnake Mountains, and it curves, and there's all these sort of mountain lakes, some really impressive high elevation habitat for all wildlife, especially black bears, grizzlies, lions, and, our elk and deer. And some great denning sites up there. A bear that lives in the Rattlesnake Wilderness can also use the Arlee side. It can use the Placid Lake side. Some of the bears that we've trapped in Missoula, we've also trapped in St. Ignatius. We've trapped them over in Seeley Lake. It's sort of the mountains themselves are where the hub of the activity is occurring. But all the best food sources are kind of down in the, the creek bottoms and down here along the river. And so, I'm just going to look at our bears that come down into the Rattlesnake. So huckleberries are one of the most important, bear foods there are in western Montana, especially up there in the Flathead Valley, around Hungry Horse Reservoir and Whitefish area. But what's nice about Missoula is we've got pretty good huckleberry, but not great huckleberry. So on a good huckleberry year, we hardly ever see any black bears down in the valley floor. Like this last year was pretty darn quiet, and one of the reasons is we had a really excellent huckleberry crop up high. But normally in the Missoula area here, it's not the huckleberry that's our main bumper food source. It's the river bottom berries. And the most important ones are probably serviceberry, chokecherry, and hawthorn. So our bear population, in this area are really keyed into those low elevation berries. And so it kind of starts, well, if you look at the Rattlesnake too, it's surrounded, by the one ridge line to the east, coming off of Elk Ridge and then Mount Jumbo, and boom, you hit Interstate 90, and then there's a fence along Interstate 90. And then if you look at the other side, you've got that big ridge coming down between Rattlesnake Creek and Grant Creek, and then Waterworks Hill, and a bang, again, you hit the interstate right about where Cherry Gulch is, and the bears shunt down into Cherry Gulch or come off Mount Jumbo and be right in Greeno Park. And then right up the middle of the Rattlesnake, it's just, one park after another, Greeno, Bugby, and then the Rattlesnake Recreation Area. So it's like the perfect, almost like a pump system for bear activity. You just got all these natural foods there, and these bears can come down and they just start doing this circular motion. And at times, like when we have a year where we have a crop failure, some berry, or if we just have a real exceptional chokecherry or serviceberry crop, we'll have upwards of 40 to 60 black bears in the Rattlesnake drainage alone. This year, I think we only had about 20. But it can get very, very interesting when you have about 60 bears, trying to eat the hawthorn and chokecherry. And it's almost impossible to get them to not cast off on all the other goodies. So, when the bears first pop out of their den, which is, most of them are out of the den by May 1st. But if you start, showing up in April, the first thing they do is usually look for green up, and to get to the best green up, the first good food, just as the fireweed and the cow parsnip and the nettles are, just kind of popping up and real lush. That's what they're craving. And so most of our black bears will come right down low to get, the first of the green up. And so they'll follow, the Rattlesnake Creek right down to Interstate 90, and they'll kind of get hung up on Greeno Park, and then they'll just start going up and down the riparian area. But then you'll get bears, coming down Waterworks and Jumbo too, and feeding on the hillsides, trying to get all that really nice, lush first green up. And then, in late May, early June, they really key into the natural cycles of deer and elk births. And so our bears have really keyed into, the deer fawning that occurs in the Rattlesnake drainage. And, we get some elk calving in the North Hills too, but boy, if you're wanting to gobble up some freshly born deer, what better place born deer, what better place than, the Rattlesnake drainage? I mean, you've seen it at night. It's like going up to Africa, through Africa, Serengeti. There's so many deer up there. It's just crazy. But it's also about the time that black bears are breeding. Breeding season is usually mid-May through June. And so what we've started to see in the rattlesnake is, they're shunting down for the natural foods. They're shunting down for the fawns, and then they're shunting down for, the breeding season. And they're sort of staging in the rattlesnake. They also do it over in Grant Creek, and they do it over in Marshall Creek, but they're staging. Everyone's down there for these nice spring foods anyways, and it's like, hey, why go to some other breeding ground? We'll hang out in the rattlesnake. So it's kind of become like a great area to come down and find a new girlfriend or find a new boyfriend, basically. And then, the females with cubs, a lot of times when they come down for all these good foods, they use the areas a little bit differently because the cubs are kind of vulnerable to the bigger adult males, so the females will be in the areas where the adult males don't hang out. So that's why you often see these kind of matriarch females dragging, 2 or 3 cubs around. Then, sadly, a bear can't help it. It's down there here for all these natural foods. It can't help but stumble onto all the goodies we have. I'm guilty of it. You're all guilty of it. Look at the stuff you throw in the garbage every day. It's a lot of work to manage your garbage. It's so nice to have a truck driver or a garbage truck driver, drive down the alley and grab it and pick it up for us, but we don't really, like, we wouldn't do that with our money. We're pretty darn careful with our money. And 1,000 years ago, we were pretty darn careful with our caches of food too. We did everything possible so that the bears wouldn't find our, winter supply of elk meat or pemmican, we were pretty careful on how we stored it. But in today's day and age, our garbage, we just throw it out in the garbage can in the back alley and let it sit there. And as a result, our local bears that come down for these natural foods just, it's like dying and going to heaven. And they could put on so much calories. And a portion of our bear population, just like a portion of our deer population, just said, the heck with living the old life, I'm going to become a city boy. And they just they became fully food conditioned and fully habituated. But then we have other bears that come down seasonally and maybe dabble a little bit in some of the exotic tastes of garbage and birdseed and dog food, but they still have a lot of those natural behaviors where they're going back up and following the food sources up high. So some of the bears just stay down. They come down in May and they never leave. But most of the bears feed, go through breeding season, and then they kind of follow the snow line up into the mountains. And they're going for a few things. They really love spring beauty. It's this little tiny white flower that has a little white corm. It's really tasty. Grows right where the snow starts to recede. And a lot of times, the elk and the deer are moving up following the snow line too during calving season and fawning season, and they start hunting those. And then there's new green up, as you follow the snow line. But like I said, there's some bears that just say the heck with it and stay down in the Missoula floor. And those are the ones that I get to know fairly well. Then starting in June, the serviceberry, it blossoms. And then, next thing you know, you've got a tremendous crop of serviceberry all around the Missoula Valley, but especially up the Rattlesnake in those big draws coming off of Jumbo and along the creek, just gobs of serviceberry. So again, they'll kind of come down and they'll really hit that serviceberry. And again, they get introduced to, Grandma Ruby's bird feeder and the folks that just love to water their lawns and manicure them. They're out there every day just with a hose in their hand, creating this really lush, beautiful, intensive habitat, turning cream into ice cream, is what I call it. And some of those bears then stay through June, but some of them start moving back up and following the serviceberry, because the serviceberry is elevational too. So they'll follow the serviceberry back up into the mountains. But then, come July and August, chokecherry. Chokecherry. And chokecherry seems to be the biggest, most dependable crop every year. It's very rare to have a chokecherry failure. And some of the time periods where we've had the most bears in Missoula is when the serviceberry crops weren't that great, but the chokecherry crops were just bumper. And I'm sure you've seen it walk along the Kim Williams Trail or down by Bernice's Bakery or up on Mount Sentinel. Just these black olive-sized chokecherries. Just everywhere. And when you have a kind of a bumper chokecherry crop and a poorer other berry crop, every bear in the country comes down to the Missoula Valley floor right along the river to feed on those chokecherries. And it can be insane. Like about 4 or 5 years ago, we had one of those years. And we had cameras up on Murphy Peak and Snow Bowl, and we had some way up in the high country around Blue Point. And in about a week period, I mean, on all the cameras, it was just like one bear after another, coming down these game trails, all of them heading to the valley floor, and it was just, there was this tremendous shift. Word got out, chokecherries, Missoula Valley, and it was insane. Then after the chokecherries sort of subside, you know, uh, the bears again will follow them elevationally back up. But then hawthorn. Hawthorn is probably our most dependable berry around here. They stay on the tree for a long, or the brush for a long, long time. So again, you'll have this shift or wave of bears coming back down for the hawthorn. And hawthorn, it's not the best tasting berry, but I mean, you could fill up on hawthorn around here. There's so much hawthorn, and I think hawthorn was really important for the making of pemmican, along with serviceberry too and chokecherry. But hawthorn was one of the best because those berries stay on forever. And so, when all the snow starts to burn off in the high country and it starts getting drier up in the high country, again, they shunt back down. So there's this constant you know, pump action going on between the high country and the Rattlesnake Valley floor. Then you throw apples in there, you throw pears in there, you throw plums in there, you throw apricots in there. And it's sort of this other unnatural food source that I almost think is natural anymore because the bears eat a bunch of plums, and they walk up these draws and find a shallow or a nice draw to daybed, and what do? They take a big old dump. And next year, you got the sprouting of the plums, and so we got wild apples and wild plums growing all over the place, and so they've created, they're doing their own gardening, Johnny Appleseed, but in a little different context. So that'll kind of give you an idea, of why you see so much bear activity in the rattlesnake drainage. It's exceptional. It's a stereotypical best situation for bears on an urban wildlands interface. Got the same thing going on in Grant Creek. Got the same thing going on in O'Brien Creek, Patty Creek, all down the Bitterroot. I mean, it's going on everywhere, but it's really, really obvious in the rattlesnake because, that's some nice country up there in that wilderness area. That holds quite a few black bears, quite a few different habitats. So a larger population of bears that just naturally are funneling right down to where we have our middle and lower rattlesnake residential areas. Now, ever so often, we'll have an extreme food failure. And those are just nightmarish for everyone, including the bears. Just high mortality. It's kind of like a bad winter for elk and deer. Like everyone's like, oh, the elk can be up there, right in the foothills, just below the peaks where the grassland is. They're fine. Even in a hard winter, they're fine. But on these exceptionally hard winters, elk and deer need these certain sites that over the last 10,000 years they've just learned that are the hard winter ranges, for the most extreme winters. And a lot of those, are right where all our subdivisions are. Lincoln Hills, uh, Butler Creek, Laval Creek, right down in the bottom. So that's why Fish and Game is always fighting all these subdivisions so hard. It's like, well, they can be up there where there's plenty of grass. Why do they need to be here? It's for those hard winters when, if they don't have their winter range, they winter kill. And we had one of those. It was, golly, 96, 97, I think. But a really large elk herd showed up on Mount Jumbo, and they were, digging and trying their best to fight all that deep snow. And I remember it was right around Christmas. A big old blizzard hit, and the whole herd came down off of Mount Jumbo and came down into Rattlesnake Creek and Greeno Creek and came and day bedded on the Higgins Street Bridge. Because the snow was so dang deep. And then come morning when the plows started working, they headed back up on Jumbo. But just like a really, really hard winter on elk and deer, bears can have a hard summer. Like it can be because of a freeze. Like we had a hard freeze here in Missoula about 15 years ago. I don't know if any of you remember it. It was like in October before the leaves fell. And I mean, it went like overnight to like 50 below. And all the leaves were frozen on the trees, and you could grab a maple leaf and snap it in half. All the aspen leaves, frozen on the tree. And because of that hard freeze the next year, holy smokes, it just killed tons of trees, but it also really impacted the fruit, of hawthorn, chokecherry, serviceberry. So the next year was one of those years where it was a food failure year here locally. And I mean, when you have one of those food failure years where every single bear is hurting and used up all their fat reserves and they go into desperation mode, where do they come? Right down here in the valley floor, and they start getting into garbage and bird feeders and freezers and breaking into houses and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. And it's not just your food conditioned bears or your habituated bears, it's all of your bears because they're starving. And it seems like those are cyclic, like every 11 years almost. But I remember that one year where we had that tremendous die off. I mean, in Bozeman, they had to rent 4 freezer units, semi-freezer units, because at that time we took all of our management bears. Those are management bears is a nice way of saying bears that you have to destroy because, for management reasons. And there were so many bears killed across the state of Montana. They had to rent these big freezer cars and they stacked them up in there. And then in the fall, they had to thaw them all out and analyze them, take measurements and pull teeth and all that kind of stuff. Roadkill during those years are just phenomenal. Like the roadkill that we get on our black bears around here, especially in the fall, when the choke cherry's really on, it's just amazing. There's been so many bears that have been killed on Interstate 90 between Rock Creek and Missoula. I've lost count. And then in the Rattlesnake drainage, every year we get bears, whacked on Van Buren and Duncan all the time. So those bad food years, things can get pretty crazy. And we call them Bearmageddons. And, we haven't had one for a while. We've had a couple where, they all come down for the choke cherry, and it gets pretty crazy. But knock on wood, I hope we don't have one of those big-time food failure years. Oh, let's see. I just seen some amazing things over time. I thought I'd tell you a few little stories. So I had 2 calls really early morning. The first one was from a rancher up in Ovando, kind of a cranky old guy. And he had a grizzly, near his house. And he called me and, told me off over the phone, told me I need to get up there right away, that this grizzly was in his yard, and I need to get up there with the trap. Well, at the same time, I got a call from a older woman who was living in the lower Rattlesnake who was watching her neighbor outside with a broom hitting a black bear over the head that had just killed a fawn in her backyard. And the fawn was her little pet fawn. She loved it. So here I have two situations going on at the same time. Rancher up Novando with grizzly, and then this gal that's hitting an adult male black bear over the head with a broom, trying to push it off of this fawn that had just freshly killed. I was like, oh, God, better go to the fawn first. So I went up there, and she was just, like, don't do anything to this bear. He lives here, I've got bears around my house at all times, but I didn't want him to kill that fawn. And I was like, well, if I were you, I would never do that again with a bear, stay in the house and call us, So you've got that kind of stuff going on in Missoula all the time. I mean, it's crazy. When you get 40 bears and you get like 400 or 500 deer and about 100 fawns running around, and then people driving all over the place, garbage all over the place, bird feeders all over the place, kids walking to school, it can get nutso. And it's actually wilder in the sense of wildness being wild animals here in the Missoula Valley than it is up in the mountains. I mean, the Bob Marshall, the scapegoat, it's beautiful, pristine country, but you see elk, you see deer, but it's kind of sterile when you think about what's going on in Missoula. I mean, it's like New York City for wildlife at times, in Missoula. I mean, we've got lions all over the place too, and lions hunting all these deer. So it can be crazy in towns. So I actually think of Missoula and some of these other western communities as being a lot wilder than the wildest mountain country you can find. Another one I had one time was Mom up the Rattlesnake. Oh, I should finish on then with the Ovando Rancher. So I went up there next, and I got there, and I was like looking for the grizzly as I drove in, and I'm like, where is it? Where is it? And he's like, out there. And he points to this grizzly out in the hayfield about a quarter mile away, and for him, that was way too close, And I just got done dealing with this other gal who was hitting a bear over the head with a broom, So I thought that was kind of funny, people's tolerance, But another one I had up the Rattlesnake was Mom was in the kitchen, kids were playing in the backyard, and there were some deer bedded there, and all of a sudden a big adult male black bear piles up over the fence and rushes the deer and gets them all squished up against the fence and kills this buck right in front of the kids, like 15 yards from them, and I'm like, whoa, okay, I'll be right up there, and we rushed up there, and the kids got in, bear wasn't interested in the kids at all, but it was using the fences in the enclosed backyards to hunt deer, and I was like, well, okay, whoa, this is, I had to kind of, my nerves were on edge, but what we ended up doing was we pushed him off and we took his deer away. I'm sure he just went off and got another deer down in the next block. But, it's just an example of some of the stuff that happens in Missoula. We had another one. It was a peak chokecherry period. And the old fellow I used to work with, Bob Wiesner, who lives on Monroe, we were trying to catch this one bear that was slipping in and out of people's garages and climbing through kitchen windows and eating pies. And when people were bringing their groceries in from the car, going back and forth between the kitchen, he would grab their groceries out of the car, And so we were trying to catch him, and Bob had seen him. And I was like, where'd you see him? He's like, right here at my house, right across the street. So I rushed up there, and we were going to try to free dart this bear. And so Bob, goes in straight from his house, and I'm down about 30 feet, 40 feet. And we both had our darting rifles looking for this bear. And we both go into the timber. So you step off Monroe Street, and you step into Greeno Park, and it's like, it suddenly turns into this wild piece of terrain, and I'm like, whoa, okay. So I hear something, so I'm kind of looking around, and I look right next to me. There's a bear like 15 yards away feeding on chokecherries. And we had those old flip phones, so I call Bob up, and he answers, and right away says, I see him. I see him right here. Okay. Yeah, he's right to my right. He's like, well, no, I see him across the creek. And I'm like, oh, well, I've got another bear over here, right next to me. And he's like, I see another bear. And so I look across the creek, and I see a bear, and Bob is seeing two bears. I've got a bear next to me, and then I look over here, and there's another two bears. So right off of the edge of Monroe, stepping into that, red osier dogwood willow, there's like six bears in there feeding on the chokecherry, and I was just like, whoa. And so we just backed out. We didn't even know which bear was the right bear. That's another story. I get bears denned all over the Rattlesnake all the time. Won't tell you where, but it's just a regular fun. Every year we've got a couple bears, and some of them will den at the bottom of the cottonwoods, where they split and they kind of dig out the pulp, and they'll have a nice den in there. A lot of them will climb up into the cottonwoods, and where branches break off, they'll dig down through the top and make a hole in the cottonwood. Sometimes where the top snaps off, they'll dig down through the top and have a nice winter den on top. You can look at the cottonwoods in January, February on a cold day, and sometimes you'll see the ice caps around where the den is, and you'll sometimes even see steam coming out. But we've had them denning in culverts. We've had them denning in woodsheds. I've had them denning in people's garages. You name it. But right now, I can think of about 4 different black bears denned right in the Rattlesnake residential area. Oh, let's see. Bears breaking into houses. It's a fairly common phenomena here. Um, so we're pretty tolerant with bears that are just doing sort of anything with natural foods. If they're getting into apples, apricots, stuff like that, it's like, you know, pick your fruit, please. There all these bears are in here. We're pretty tolerant with bears that are tipping garbage and getting into bird feeders. It's like, well, take your bird feeder down. We aren't going to trap a bear because he's getting into your bird feeder so you can put your bird feeder back up. We aren't going to do that. Same with garbage. But the minute we have a bear that's showing aggressiveness toward people, breaking into houses, stalking people, that kind of thing, boy, we act quite quickly. And we do usually destroy those bears. Um, um, and I could go on and on about houses that have been broken into, but let's see, the last one we checked out was up in Woods Gulch. This gal came home um, and thought a homeless person had broken into her house. She saw that the windows were ajar and lights were all on in the house, and she was like, "What's going on here?" So she, called the police right away, and the police responded. Even the police thought it was a break-in, but a bear had been able to squeeze in through the kitchen, if I remember right, and then wreaked havoc. Got caught in there, turned on the shower, had the faucets on, turned all the lights on, uh, tore up the furnace, scratched all the couches, tipped over the ice box, and it was obviously trapped in there all night, and then finally it squeezed out. But I've had quite a few of those. Um, the only way to get bears to that stage is if you're an exceptional animal trainer. And I'll just say that there are a lot of people that are exceptional animal trainers that don't know they're exceptional animal trainers, where they're training up bears to get that bad. And so that's where the bears that we're targeting. We're trying to remove those worst case offenders, so that people have better or higher tolerance for the bears that are just trying to live and eke out a normal bear living. Um, let's see, a couple other stories. We've had some really interesting encounters in the Rattlesnake, but one of my favorites was a guy training for a tough man contest. He was a young guy, in his 30s, And he would take off and run through Greeno Park, not on the trails. He would go cross country through the brush at top speed. And he was jogging, I think, down the creek and leaping over big, thick patches of tangled red osier dogwood. And he leaped over a log and landed right on a female black bear nursing her cubs. And he was going so fast, he was able to keep on going. And she was like, "Whoa, what's going on?" But that could have turned into a really horrible situation. Thank goodness it didn't. We've had some really spooky things happen with some of the homeless camps, where these bears are coming into homeless camps at night, and pulling, food bags right out of the tent. Let's see. And then my favorite is always, it seems like every time there's a Grizz football game and everyone comes to town, and when they leave the game and they're all walking back to their vehicles, there's always some female black bear that decides to come out right at that time and gets up in a tree, and there's a giant bear jam with hundreds of people standing around it, hoping that we'll dart them and try to catch them with a trampoline or something. Uh, there's always lots and lots of things like that. Let's see, back to grizzlies. So we're starting to see more grizzlies showing up in this country. When my dad was doing the Border Grizzly Project, he had a couple young grizzlies that he trapped over there on, kind of on the St. Ignatius side. But they came up and they denned in the Rattlesnake up around McLeod Peak. And since the 80s, the Flathead Indian Reservation, whenever they capture a grizzly over on, around Ronan, St. Ignatius, Crow Creek, where do you think they release them? The remotest area they have is in the Jocko, the South Fork of the Jocko, or the main fork of the Jocko. And where's that? Right over the top from Rattlesnake Creek. So just keep that in the back of your mind that, bears that are caught up in the foothills of the missions, that's where they're relocated a lot of times. We had one grizzly named Ethel. If you get bored tonight, Google her up. They've got all of her locations on the internet, and you can see where she traveled, this immense travel. She was originally captured up by Big Fork, and then she was relocated to the South Fork. She ended up coming down along the Rocky Mountain front into the Sealy area, and then set up shop here in the Missoula area, and actually denned up on Wishart Ridge. She booted her subadult out in the spring. She headed back up to the Flathead, but then in the fall she came back down in the Missoula area and spent a lot of time in the Rattlesnake, in Butler Creek, in Grant Creek, by the dump, by the Randolph homestead, and you can see all her movements on the internet. So she's a pretty cool bear. She ended up going all the way to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and then she crossed Interstate 90 and was over in Idaho by Marysville, and then she was even down here by Lolo. She's an amazing bear how she traveled all through this country. Then let's see, we had a male killed by a black bear hunter up Johnson Creek, which is just not too far from East Missoula. That was in 2017. We had the North Hills female grizzly showed up in the North Hills here in 2021, and she was all over the Rattlesnake. People had pictures of her up on Elk Ridge. She crossed the Rattlesnake right through the residential area several times. She started breaking into cabins up Butler Creek and Laval Creek. And we did set traps for her. We never captured her. But then the next spring, she didn't show up. I have a feeling she got shot. I'm not sure. But she had three little ones the year before. And I need to get the DNA results back. It takes us like 4 years to get our DNA results back. So I don't know if it's the same bears. But a mountain biker found a grizzly bear foot on the snowball road. And then shortly thereafter, we had two grizzlies go through the lower end of the Rattlesnake, both little tiny ones, and they ended up over in Marshall Creek and then went over the top and into Twin Creek, and we captured them. The one was missing the foot. I think it was shot off. And sadly, we had to put that bear down. I couldn't believe it was still alive. It was septic, infection. It was unbelievable. The other one we put a collar on and relocated. Let's see. We had that great big male killed in 2022 right in Bonner. His name was Dick. I knew him from the Ovando area, and we caught him on Dick Creek. That's why he was named Dick. But he hadn't worn a collar for many years, and then he showed up dead. I mean, just outside of Bonner, not even a mile. Then we collared a little grizzly named 8-Ball years and years ago that denned in the Rattlesnake, and he spent time in the Rattlesnake. And then just this last year, we caught a big adult male grizzly up Gold Creek, and he's wearing a collar now. He spent quite a bit of time in the Rattlesnake, never came down in the residential areas, but he's denned up in the Rattlesnake Wilderness right now. Let's see, I guess I've been rambling on for about an hour. I just wanted to say that, Phase 1, the ordinance, kicked in last year, and they got bear-resistant garbage cans all through the Rattlesnake. It was much quieter last year, and I attribute a lot of that to the fact that we now have bear-resistant garbage cans all over. But we also had that really good huckleberry crop. The problem is when you go cold turkey on a bear population that's had easy garbage for many, many years, they'll often shift to the adjacent community, like East Missoula, Bonner, and Milltown, which occurred last year. But then, too, certain individuals will enhance their efforts. They're like, man, I got tons of garbage at this house for the last 15 years. I know it's in the garage there. I'll just break the garage and get into it. We had a lot of that happen this last spring. And sadly, we did have to remove a female with 2 subadults that was very aggressive with the homeless camps, and then, broke into several houses. And, sadly, we had to put her down. And then we had a young male that was really breaking into houses all over the Rattlesnake. And because of that behavior, we put him down. But last year, there was still a female with cubs in the upper Rattlesnake. She never did anything really heinous, but she did go into quite a few garages that were left open, and she really hit the apples. She really hit the pears. And then we had a couple other lone bears. But compared to years past, it was very quiet in the Rattlesnake, and I'm quite curious to see how it changes this next year. And then Phase 2 is about to kick into gear. So all this country, around the University District is going to get bear-resistant garbage cans. And then Phase 3, the rest of the Missoula Valley kicks in the next year. And it's 3 now. I've rambled on for quite a bit. So, yeah, people have questions. One of these years, I'll put together a PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, no, I find it a good switch up to do not a presentation, to have someone just telling stories. It's really nice. Yeah, so we got plenty of time for questions. If anyone has one, we'll pass around the mic just so everyone can hear what you're asking.
Why is bear fat so desirable? And as long as I can, I will also ask, you talked about Ethel in the past tense. What happened to Ethel?
Well, with Ethel, the past tense is mostly she dropped her collar. Nobody really knows what became of her, but it's an amazing bear, and she dropped her collar up in the Tobacco Valley by Eureka. She could very well be alive, but she was an older female. She reminded me of several girlfriends I had in the past. She was like always traveling. Yeah. And, I'd like to think she's still alive. Yeah. The bear. And then bear fat is just excellent for cooking with. In the old days, it was like Crisco, and they used fat, for the pemmican, but then they used fat for baking. And then, you could chop up all the bear meat or elk or deer meat and put it in a barrel and then pour hot fat over it, and layer it, and you could preserve your meat that way. So a lot of the settlers really like bear fat because some of these males that we've caught, like we caught, let's see, which grizzly was that? So it was the grizzly that was road killed in Lincoln. He was our biggest grizzly here on this side of the divide, and he was like 834 pounds or something like that. And I skinned him out, and the amount of fat was just like phenomenal. I was like, oh my God. So male bears are kind of like bankers, but instead of money, they accumulate fat, and they just get fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter and bigger. But I took a knife out, and it was 11 inches of fat on his hind end. And there were some Native Americans that wanted to have some of the fat for, various religious rituals. So I carved off like a garbage bag that must have weighed damn near 90 pounds of fat. And he still had plenty of fat on him when I was done. So, I think it was used for medicinal purposes. I think people used it in their hair. I think people used it to keep in tanning. I think bear fat's just a really phenomenal fat.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the old copper mine on Mount Sentinel. This year has a bear in it. Are bears fairly faithful to their previous dens? And could we expect that same bear to come back?
Well, he could. He's dumb as a post. I mean, it's the absolutely worst place to den. But I've had other bears den in really bad spots too, and I think he was just a lazy bear. It's like, oh, here's a hole. And we've had a dickens of a time trying to keep people away from him. So don't spread the word that there's a bear denned up there. Keep it on the down low. And then if you know of anyone that's trying to be stupid and go in there and get pictures of them, chew them out. There were a couple Reddit posts of them, people crawling in there. I guess someone lost their cell phone in there, and it's still in there. But they do seem to routinely return to the den site. Like a lot of the bears that we've had collared will return to the maternity den, even if it's their mothers, And usually the dens cave in if it's a natural den in the dirt, but they'll dig another den nearby. But then sometimes, boom, third year, they're off on a different mountain, digging a den somewhere else. So yes and no. But if it's a really good den site, I've had dens in the Rattlesnake that keep getting reused by different bears from over time.
So maybe everybody knows this, but there's a difference in the reproductive cycle between black bears and grizzlies. Blacks have cubs every other year, and grizzlies not necessarily every other year. But my question, I guess, is, are multiple offspring as common in grizzlies as they are in black bears?
So yeah, good question. It's like Mother Nature around here seemed to make two of everything. We got a black bear and we got a grizzly, and we got a bobcat and we got a mountain lion, we got a coyote and a wolf. They have the same kind of niches. Coyotes can reproduce quickly, don't live very long. Wolves produce fairly quickly too, but live longer. Black bears, yes, they seem to have a much quicker cycle. They mature a little bit earlier. Grizzlies, it varies, but it seems like a good matriarch female, a mother that is 10 plus, 14, 20 years old. The older the mothers get, the better mother they seem to become, at least with grizzlies. And we'll see females keeping their offspring till the third year. And then that fourth year, they maybe push them off, and then during breeding season, maybe get bred. Sometimes they even have an off year, but they have a slower reproductive rate, and the birthing time periods are a little longer. But then you'll get certain younger females or certain females that seem to be poor mothers even when they get older, and they're always losing all their offspring the second year or the first year, and they'll go into heat again, and they'll have sort of a different birth pulse. But yeah, just lower fecundity rate in our grizzlies than a black bear. Yeah. But a lot of variation. When you work with bears all the time, you can't help but get a little anthropomorphic, and you start learning the individuals. A lot of completely different personalities. Each bear, black bear, grizzly, they all have their own little quirky personality, just like we do.
I have a question real quick. So you talked about the transition in terms of hunting bears from being more a free-for-all to being more seasons and permits, and that was in the 60s approximately, you said?
Yes, in the 40s is when they started thinking of bears as more than just varmints. So now they're managed more as big game species.
Was that transition more was it from data, either qualitative or quantitative, or from the people wanting that to happen, or was it more of a government starting point?
Well, I think it was just they were shooting the hell out of everything, and our game populations were just nosediving all over. You know, by the 1900s, everything had tanked, everything here in the Rocky Mountain West, and you know, very slowly they've come back, and you know, reached some pretty good high, you know, good high populations. But you know, they've got a pretty good handle on bear numbers, black bear and grizzly both. As you know, the grizzly is listed, and there's a big push to delist them right now. But it's pretty crazy what's going on all around the world, including here in the United States. So yeah, I don't have much hope. I am worried and concerned about a lot of different things.
Yes.
Well, kind of like coyotes, you know, they've been trying to kill coyotes forever. I mean, the wildlife services, I mean, they spend a lot of money each year trying to annihilate the coyote, and they just never could. There's certain species that are just like generalists, like us. You know, no matter what you do, you can't get rid of them. And coyotes, white-tailed deer, black bears to a lesser extent, but there's certain species out there that are more generalists, and they just adapt to change a lot better. And I would say black bears adapt to change much better than grizzlies. Grizzlies are kind of ornery, you know, and they're like, they aren't going to give up the trail. Grizzlies are like moose. Like everyone's always like, well, if you start shooting and hunting grizzlies, you know, they'll learn to fear man. Well, what happens? They learn to fear man by dying, because they're like a moose. They just stand there. You know, they're used to being king of the road, and you know, maybe once in a while you'll get a bear that gets shot in the hind end, you know, and survives and gets a little more wary. But with the firearms out there today, not very many are going to survive.
Two things. First, I just heard recently on our Bear Action Facebook page, which I hope everybody can sign up for, Rattlesnake Bear Action, that insurance wouldn't have covered that woman's situation with her house when the bear came in and wrecked everything. One of the people who posts said that.
Yeah, so some of that came from that article that was in the Missoulian about the gal in Potomac that had her car broken into. But I know insurance does cover break-ins by bears and cars. I've had to file, you know, reports for various insurance companies. You know, it's kind of like a natural act. I could see if it was the third time a bear broke into your house because you leave your garbage outside or you have a bird feeder up, where the insurance company would say, nope. But I know of insurance companies that have covered.
Well, that's good, but the other woman who was one of the admins on this Facebook page knew of a situation where they didn't, because they didn't cover bears.
Yeah, you know, I think the insurance companies are trying to find every way on earth not to cover anything right now.
Anymore. Yeah.
They aren't making any money.
Yeah. My other question was just, it is surprising, might surprise some people about, you know, that the grizz were denser in the prairie areas than here. I think we often think that they like forests and stuff. So can you just talk about that for a second?
Yeah, you know, like out on the prairies, the shortgrass prairies, it was like Africa. You know, it was a Serengeti. That was our Serengeti, and everything out there just was there. Everything was out there. The buffalo herds were amazing. The numbers of grizzlies feeding and scavenging off those buffalo herds. The elk. I mean, it was like an African Serengeti. It was Rocky Mountain Serengeti, and didn't really have. We didn't see that elsewhere. The Palouse Prairie, over on the other side of the mountains, it had some of that, but nothing like that Rocky Mountain front country. So it was just unique, and everything was out there, including the grizzlies and the wolves. But there were wildlife everywhere, just not at that density.
Since you mentioned that the grizzly bears are listed now, but that there is a push to delist, could you give us give me or anybody else, a little background or a little like how has that gone back and forth as to now they are listed, but there's a push to delist them?
Yeah, I think politically right now, I bet there's going to be a congressional delisting, just like there was with the wolves. I hope not. I hope we can follow through and see things to the end following the process of the Endangered Species Act as a success story. But Wyoming, Montana, the state agencies, nobody ever likes to be bossed around by the federal government. And I don't know if you're familiar with the history of the whole grizzly listing, but Montana, Idaho, Wyoming were being bullet heads, back in the 50s and 60s, and in essence, the federal government through the Endangered Species Act sort of stepped in and said, "You guys can't manage them anymore. In fact, you guys all have to come together in the same room and learn how to play together, and you're going to become the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee, and you're going to, revitalize the population." And at first, there was a lot of animosity. The state agencies and the federal agencies weren't getting along. The Forest Service, the BLM, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, state of Montana, state of Idaho, state of Wyoming, all had to kind of work together. But over time, we started seeing improvement. Everything was working out great. And then they started pushing for some of the Yellowstone delistings, and they would be delisted, then relisted, delisted, relisted. The NCDE was never, ever went through that delisting process. But down in Yellowstone, they just kept failing and failing and failing, and the judges were like, "Nope, you guys don't have it. You don't have this right. You don't have this right. You don't have this right." So it's really become frustrating, I think, for a lot of the state agencies and the public. And then other members of the public and other NGOs don't want to see delisting. It's a crazy time. And people always seem to forget, too, that, people aren't stopping. Like just one of the changes I've seen here in Montana in the last 8 years have blown my socks off. For a while, we had a lull, when we, you weren't seeing a lot of development. But ever since COVID, I mean, it's just gone full-blown crazy here in Montana again. It seems like everyone and their brother's moving here. And the number of houses and subdivisions and the amount of recreation use, it's just poof. So I'm always trying to get people to remember that, hey, it's not getting better. It's getting worse, So think about that. So what it all boils down to for bears and for all wildlife is we have to leave them some habitat so that they can survive into the future. And that's why all the linkage zones and corridors are such a big thing right now, so that we don't have a bunch of little islands in a sea of humanity. I think of humans as the new glacial ice sheet. Instead of ice, it's us, sliding across the wild country. I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah, it's complicated.
Okay, going along the same lines as that, what are the implications of delisting the grizzly bear from a conservationist viewpoint, and what can we do about it?
Well, right now things are so tenuous that right now everything is just in turmoil. There are people that have worked for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service BLM calling me, asking me if I have any work, because everyone's just so terrified that there might not be a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or a BLM or a U.S. Forest Service. These things right now are just in terrible, terrible turmoil. So I think everyone just sort of needs to kind of sit down and kind of watch and see which direction things are going to go here for a while. I don't know if that helps you or not, but that's what I'm doing. I'm tucking in and kind of just watching to see exactly what's going to happen here in the next 4 or 5 years.
All right, I think we got time for one more, and then we can have some conversations afterwards.
Thanks. I've lived in the middle Rattlesnake for 20 years, and I've noticed a significant decline in the amount of bear scat in my yard since the bear-proof or bear-resistant containers came out. So I'm really happy to see that. And when everyone was curbing, their garbage the night before pickup, I call that buffet night.
Yeah, it's never simple. Everyone always thinks it's simple, but it's never simple. But now I've been working with Republic Services and Grizzly Disposal, and others are working with them as well to change some of the pickup times. But they pick up one side of the valley and then the other side of the valley. So no matter where you are in the Rattlesnake, at some point in the week, there's garbage out, And so I'm trying to even have them pick up garbage, like start at the lower Rattlesnake and work their way up north, because the way they're doing it right now, there's always garbage out somewhere. Except now the phase 1 has helped a great deal. But yeah, it seems like it was a great year, but I'm not going to get too excited yet. I'm going to wait and see what next year looks like. Because if we have a real food failure and a lot more bears come into town, we might see more bears breaking and entering into home sites because they have that memory of easy food from the past and they maybe weren't here last year. So maybe next year they're going to come down and they're going to find all the garbage all locked up in dumpsters, and maybe there'll be a few more break-ins. But I hope not. I hope not.
All right, well, we'll call it good there. Thanks so much, Jamie, and thanks everyone for coming. I think I'll stick around if you guys want to ask more questions.